ah welcome to today's cyber CoP gathering. Don Timian here. I'm the chair. Before I introduce our speaker, I've got one administrative announcement I want to give very quickly. Well, actually, I have two. Let me rephrase that. If you want the digits for today's presentation, if for some reason you don't have them, just shoot me a note via email, and I'll be happy to send them to you at Don Timian, all one word, at hotmail.com. It's in the chat window at the very top. The second item I have concerns a request to do interviews with members of the cyber CoP from Lee Macron at Sandia Lab. A group of students from the University of Pittsburgh have requested to interview members of the cyber CoP as part of a course called Innovating for Public Impact. The purpose of the course is to apply lean startup methods to rapidly innovate on solutions to technical problems. A key aspect of the course is interviewing as many stakeholders as possible to develop value positions and chat a path to solution development. The students are addressing a problem related to quantification of cybersecurity performance in both information tech and operational tech perspectives. Would be of value to the students as they explore the problem space. The students are being advised by Lee Macron of Sandia, who is a member of the CoP. I'm going to put Lee's email address here in just a second up on the window. Excuse me, in the chat window. And if you're interested, it's about 30 minutes per interview. So please contact Lee. And give me about 2 seconds here.
Hey, Don, this is Chuck Burdick. You did not put the ID for the meeting in the latest thing you sent out. I had to go back to your previous one to find it. And that may account for why you have so few people linked up.
It was in the text. That's why I didn't bother to do it. And for what it's worth, Chuck, when I clicked on the hyperlink, it didn't even ask me for the meeting ID. But what do I know?
Okay.
This is the first time using Zoom with MORS in a while, so it's possible it's smarter than all of us. Okay, and I just posted Lee's email address for those of you who would be interested in helping him out with his students and doing a brief 30-minute interview. Okay, let me move on to our guest speaker today, Mr. Kevin O'Neill, who is the founder and CEO of CYVA Research. Kevin is an entrepreneur, architect, technologist, privacy, and cybersecurity activist. He has 35 years of diverse experience in information technology, encompassing a variety of engineering, management, and consulting engagements in commercial and government sectors. And with that, I'll just hand the ball off to Kevin. Over to you, sir.
Don, I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about cybersecurity, privacy, and trust issues as we face in our society here. Again, I've been around for about 35 years, worked at a lot of different companies, predominantly in the tech sector, financial services, but right out of college, I worked on military and intelligence community projects. in the early 80s into the 90s, and continued to submit and participate in government contracts regarding cyber warfare. All right. And one of the key points that I've been struggling with for many years is how do you protect and control sensitive information? If you're constructing or working on a worldwide war planning system for the Air Force, as I was back in the 90s, it is top priority that you be able to protect top secret information as you're sending that information out within a battlefield live. And one of the issues that I struggled with as the head of the database design group was it was great that we can encrypt information, protect it in the database, and then we send it across some very specialized network with all the advanced capabilities for protecting data in transit. But it always bothered me once you send that information and you provide the recipient the decryption key, do you have any further control over that message or that information? The answer is a definitive no. And that was back in the 90s. And so I began engineering, as I thought as a software engineer, as an architect, how could I create a new class of information objects that were always under my control post-decryption? And I would argue that that type of technology has huge implications for industry. It has huge implications for society if human beings could actually control their information wherever it exists. And right now, most of the data that's produced about human beings right now is heavily surveilled by big tech. And we all know this. We all experience this. So again, fast forward to today, I am still trying to work with special forces and other groups within the Navy, the Air Force, and we've accomplished some very positive feedback from special forces in the ability to do human intelligence work and to control sensitive information being shared amongst intelligence assets, namely spies, and controlling that information. So it's good to have these positive feedback here. But I'm going to give you a broader picture today beyond the military application to the larger issue of human digital liberty. And that's the title I've given this session. I want to talk about human digital liberty, platforms and services. These are smartphones, IoT devices. And I want to also alert you that Dr. Alan Shapiro, who was my former boss many years ago, is on the call with us, and I've invited him to join us. One of the key areas that we're all dealing with right now, as you look at Elon Musk and this recent lawsuit against OpenAI, is the fact that will there be a super intelligence very near to us right now in terms of development? And so there's huge implications about the powers and capabilities of AI for good or for evil. But the point is there's a huge worldwide discussion over what safety measures we could implement to control a super intelligence. All right, question number one. Do you believe humans have a right to protect and control their personal information wherever it exists? Now, I don't have any polling right now, but generally speaking, people do believe that they have a right to defend themselves, all right? We have a Second Amendment right, but we don't have any Second Amendment right for cyberspace, right? And I'm simply arguing that privacy as a concept has been around for ancient times, all right? People do value their privacy, and other people don't give a rip about it. They share their information on Facebook, whatever, and they honestly don't care about it. Perhaps a younger generation is not sensitive enough to that. But what we've devised here, we've been engineering what I call a personal information agent. It is a human-controlled, intelligent, self-protecting, self-governing, self-monetizing mobile identity. It moves around cyberspace under your control, and it is intelligent, and it does protect itself. Its ambition, its goal is to put you and I in control of our data wherever it exists. And I'm simply saying that's essential to security, privacy, and liberty. All right, so point number one here, I want to argue, and I was a Burton Group analyst for about a year. We were bought up by Gartner. So I wrote several papers, industry analyst papers on the subject of cybersecurity, privacy, and privacy frameworks. I was the instigator of the KPMG privacy assurance practices back in the 90s. And I took a year to convince my partners that we ought to be advising our clients, especially international clients, on what the Europeans were doing about data protection laws. And so I'm kind of steeped in policy and legal matters, but I'm a technologist and I build things. Right? But it's essential to understand, and this is my perspective, that this entire catastrophe, cybersecurity catastrophe, is entirely man-made. We created this mess. We are responsible for this mess. Much like pollution, if you were back in the 70s, you drove through Los Angeles, your eyes would start burning because of the amount of pollution in the air. But again, laws were created and new regulations for cars and catalytic converters, etc. We began to clean up the environment. We have an environment that is saturated with cybercrime every day. The statistics are awful. 1.5 billion records were sold in 2021. Billion records. That's 5 times the size of the US population. So individual records for human beings. So again, it is out of control. The FBI says there's 4,000 ransomware attacks per day. And you cannot get into the news and do a Google search on data breach and not find yet another data breach. All right. And we're getting warnings again of the Chinese conducting cyber operations against our infrastructure. Second point here, core to this man-made security catastrophe is what is called primitive data types or dumb data. And it is a dumb bag of bits. All right, it's not intelligent. It could be a character C or the number 1, an integer, a floating point, a Boolean, whatever. This is dumb data. If you're a programmer, you write a program, you create variables, you declare what are the data types. These primitive data types have been around for decades, all right? And my question is, why can't we re-engineer data so it's self-protecting, it's self-governing? And I would argue that is a necessary paradigm shift, because right now we're living in a paradigm of dumb data. Thirdly, there's been a war raging for years over who owns and controls personal information. And I would argue we are the losers. If you read any privacy policy statements been around for decades here, generally speaking, you walk into a healthcare facility or a hospital, whatever, you read the privacy statement, that statement is going to declare that your data record is the property of that business, your property. And if that business is sold, that data is an asset to the corporation. All right, so the moment you make the philosophical assertion that a human being's data is their data, I'm arguing you have just become property in a digital sense, a form of slavery, all right? And so by design, our personal information is weak, it's vulnerable, it's easy prey. So I'm simply saying there's a purpose behind dumb data or weak data. So perpetuating a primitive dumb data paradigm, it's essential to the status quo. It's essential to the business model and strategy of maximum control and exploitation of personal information by big business, big tech. And I argue that our government, and I'm not saying all government, I'm simply saying that there are sectors of governments that want to have total information awareness. They argue that it's necessary for crime prevention. And so that we've had a grand debate going on for years over how far do we allow the federal government to spy on American citizens. And of course, we have a FISA court and there's a process. And yes, we had 9/11 and there were necessary abilities for us, if you're in the area of warfare, if you're in the area of preventing cybercrime, you want to be able to have the ability to spy on individuals where there is some sort of evidence that they're communicating with foreign agents who are hostile to the United States. So I fully support that type of intrusive surveillance, but it has to go through a judge. All right, next point here, whoever controls our data controls our life. They have the power to manipulate, to intimidate, to eliminate, to cancel, and exert tyrannical powers. So yes, there is a debate today about to what extent during COVID, where Roger Malone and so many other experts who were contesting vaccinations, why were they shut down, and who exactly ordered that, did that? And so yes, we have lots of whistleblowers who are simply explaining to us that yes, information is powerful, and if you control Twitter or Facebook, you have the ability to shut down the voices of individuals or influence them or corral them into a way of thinking. So I'm simply saying personal information is vital to a society. I want to go step back a little bit in history here. I'm in my 60s now. I know cars back in the 60s had no safety belts. For 85 years, US auto manufacturers built cars without safety belts. Thousands of people died, all right? His name was Ralph Nader. He wrote a book on Safe at Any Speed, The Design and Dangers of the American Automobile. That was a catalyst for necessary change in the auto industry because thousands and thousands of people were dying in auto accidents. There were protests. I'm arguing today our data has no safety belts, and that's by design. A new book should be entitled Unsafe at Any Clock Speed, The Design and Dangers of Information Technology. It's long overdue. I'm arguing that, in a sense, our computer systems or information systems are like those old vehicles. They were designed in an unsafe manner. We know it's unsafe, and yet we continue to perpetuate building data that has no ability to protect itself. It's not intelligent. It can be manipulated easily. It can be collected very easily. And it's being purposely forwarded as a paradigm for computing. So in response to that, as a small entrepreneur, I want to offer disruptive, innovative cybersecurity solutions. So we want to forward human digital liberty platforms and services, our personal information agent technology, which is designed to provide human beings the ability to protect, to control, and to monetize their information assets, and the ability to fight for their freedom, for their security, their privacy in an increasingly hostile world. I'm not going to go into depth about irregular warfare, but if you watch the news, you look at what's going on in many, many countries, you have tyrannical states that for years have operated surveillance states. They're police states, Russia, China, etc. You can't do anything. You can't speak, you can't discuss, you can't travel without the surveillance capabilities of that country, keeping the government informed about who you are, where you are, and what in the world are you doing. I don't want the United States to end up like that. A little bit about the invention. I started filing patents back in the 90s. It was a, how should I say, a long time effort to rethink what would a personal information agent, or what would what was in my mind as an engineer, it was, what would I be if I were digital? If Kevin O'Neill was now a digital creature, what sort of capabilities would I want? What would I want to be able to do? How would I protect myself? How would I interact with other entities or agents or corporations? And I began working on an object model. And I'll just explain this very briefly. On the left-hand side is essentially an engineering diagram for software. And we'll talk about the hardware a little bit later here. But this electronic being would have the ability to maintain privilege rules, its rules regarding the use of its information assets. It might be a photograph, and see, this photograph is for my family only. But I want to be able to capture that privilege rule and have it assigned or part of that object. So the object is intelligent to know to say this object, this asset, this picture is only for my family members. I have digital certificates. I spent years working on PKI issues digital certificates, digital identity, etc. But I want to have some mechanism to hold on to a certificate to assert identity to a group, to a corporation, to a government. The next thing are trusted tokens. These are just simply security keys or tokens that would be used to encrypt things or to unlock things. Then there's an interact protocol. This is an ability for two agents to talk to one another. And I never sell my information. I simply clone myself, and my policies travel with my data. The other thing is very important here. I wanted to be able to audit at any moment, at any time, the use of my information. So I have an audit trail of date, time, who did what operation on which data object. I want to have a forensic audit trail of every interaction or use of my information. On the right-hand side is a Samsung device. That is a user interface to the object that you see here. A photograph, my PIA ID. I simply have a reputation management system also alongside of this, saying that I'm a trusted individual within a community. I have a first name and a phone number. But again, the hardware is very important here, because as a software engineer, I realize I cannot have self-protecting unless I have an environment that's going to enforce the policies and protect the data wherever it exists. So the hardware and software associated with this personal information agent is a confidential computing capable processor. Now, I can't see you all, I can't see you raising your hands, but how many people understand or ever worked with Trust Zone or trusted execution environments, or even read a paper on confidential computing? There are NIST papers today about confidential computing and its capabilities, the ability to protect data in use. We've had protection of data at rest, protection of data in transit for many years. But back probably about 15 years ago, ARM was the entity that created the technology and then licensed that technology through patent rights to Samsung, Qualcomm, and a whole raft, NXP, other companies that took that invention, and now they've implemented it into silicon, into our chipsets, namely the Qualcomm series Snapdragon. And so this technology is broadly available in our phones, and it is essentially an enclave. It's a protected memory inside the device that the regular operating system has no access to. So I'm simply arguing the fact that we've got hardware and we've got software that we can put together and provide the capability for a human being to control their information. And that might be a warrior who's communicating with an asset who's inside the Taliban, who's working for us. And you want to maintain the confidentiality of the identity of that asset and also any messages. And we'll demonstrate a little bit about that just now. I'm going to try this video here very quickly here. Hello. Information that you want to limit the amount of time a recipient can see and display the device. All right. Deployed on a cloud server. These are guests on my device and IoT devices. And what I'm going to show you is that these agents are deployed, but they have a owner operator, which is me. Basically, this is my identity agent that I've sent to another phone. And these are my privacy, security, and liberty policies. Actions permitted, namely display and read. So I'm going to allow the recipient to see my phone number, photograph, etc., and allow another program, let's say a phone, to read the phone number and make the phone call. These are community-based policies, namely I decide which communities my agent belongs to, and other members of the community have these display and read privileges. Also dynamically, I want to be able to control the amount of time, which I call meter time policy, of how long the agent will allow itself to be displayed or read. And so just to demonstrate remote control, or the fact that you have direct authoritative control over your identity agent. I'm going to be able to essentially contact and control my agent wherever it exists. So I've just locked my agent. I am unlocking it, and if I decide, I can simply erase the agent itself. Store here for this demonstration. And so I'm able to send messages via the agent. As you see, Go Tango. I'm going to modify that message. And again, I want to be able to control the amount of time. And again, this is a metered time policy that the agent is going to be available. I want to be able to do this dynamically. So I've just set the meter time policy to 20 seconds. And we're just going to watch it count down for the 20 seconds. And there's different scenarios you're going to be wishing to control how much time recipients can utilize your information. And then the recipient could request more time. So this is an example of our mission is to provide people the ability to control their information wherever it exists and allow them to derive value and or benefit from the use of their information assets. Thank you. All right, let's continue. In closing, we continue to advance the... Well, it's not allowing me to progress here. Warrior I am, and also the human I am. All right. Let's talk about cyber warfare and liberty, a strategic viewpoint here. As I've stated, information objects, primitive data types, they've never been designed to be operator controlled, human controlled. They're not intelligent, they're not self-protecting, they're certainly not self-governing. Again, our information is weak, easy prey by design. Big tech, I'm talking Google, Facebook, the whole gang, they're making billions and billions of dollars off our weak, vulnerable, easy prey data, and they aggressively continue to promote a dumb data status quo. I'm arguing that our industry is stuck in, and they promotes this primitive dumb data, which puts us all at risk. And we need to go beyond encryption. Encryption is great for hiding the meaning of information, but has very little to do with operational control. The other aspect is that we're getting 4,000 attacks a day regarding ransomware. So this is encryption being used against us. So again, as an inventor, I'm saying encryption is great for hiding information, but we need to go beyond encryption and have intelligent data that is self-protecting. That simply says, you don't have the right to encrypt me. I'm protecting myself. And we are using artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, and I'll explain a little bit more to what extent and what types of algorithms we're using. And the distinction between the AI that is going on now at OpenAI and neural networks and how that contrasts with an algorithm called ID3, a modified version of that. Right now, again, people have no control over their personal information, and we're increasingly angry and fearful. And I argue we need to disrupt this status quo worldwide. So there is out of control collection. We all feel it. There's exploitation and there's a fundamental disrespect for citizens' unalienable rights of privacy, security, and liberty. Now, I've been tracking the EU Data Protection Directive, GDPR, since the 90s. There are a lot of countries Google cannot do what it's doing in the United States, especially in countries like Germany and France. And so Germany will not allow this sort of anything goes regarding the collection of personal information. And when I was at KPMG back in the 90s, yes, the Commerce Department was very busy because there are a lot of US corporations who did not want foreign entities or foreign governments telling them what they could or could not do with personal information. So the war continues over what type of laws we have here in the United States. And in the United States, we have a very fragmented country regarding California and many states that are very aggressive about protecting consumer rights over personal information, where other states are not. But again, it's a patchwork of laws. It's complicated. But again, there are efforts to give humans the right to control their information, going beyond merely access to it. Irregular cyber warfare. I'm arguing that our present battle space agility and dominance is greatly impacted negatively by this primitive, weak, dumb data paradigm. Our battlefield essentially is compromised everywhere we go because the data, the IoT devices, etc., the computing architecture is fundamentally flawed at its core. So I'm arguing that we need to adapt, we need to improvise, we need to move strategically to overcome these inherent data weaknesses that are throughout our military infrastructure because of weak data objects. So I'm arguing that we need to strategically re-engineer cyberspace at its core, the data object, and re-engineer that data object to the advantage of people who care about the US Constitution. They care about the rights of individuals to protect themselves. They care about their privacy and their liberty. And probably most importantly here, the right to own and create property and derive value from the use of that property. Yes, millions of people want to advertise to us. They want to sell us stuff because they observed us looking at an ad for a set of golf clubs. And so we get inundated with messages to different platforms, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And we say, okay, is that benign? I'm arguing that it's not benign. Those data behaviors that are stored in massive profiles on us can be used against us. You know, people can be canceled, they can have their speech cut off, etc. That information can be used against them, especially our warriors. When we break into enemy computers, what do we find? We find dossiers, detailed dossiers on our members. So again, I want to re-engineer the battle space to our advantage. I want us to be able to enforce our constitutional rights in cyberspace. Got ahead of myself here. All right. So there is no end in sight to the escalating collection and exploitation of personal information. And this does concern our military. I mean, these are quotes from operators and commanders. The fact is that the documents have the names and addresses of families and all the pressures that can be put on them to bear on them. Yes, what do our enemies do when they capture our soldiers and they tell them, yes, we know where your daughter goes to school, we know where they're located, etc. We have cells within the United States, and yes, if you're living in San Diego, you're not safe. All right, because there's too much information, especially geolocation information. Every time you use Google Map or any sort of mapping function, that geolocation information is being sent off. There's probably hundreds of companies, data brokers that collect and sell geolocation information. So AI, machine learning, IoT devices, they're being embedded everywhere by surveillance capitalists. Surveillance capitalism was a term created by another author, and I think she did a wonderful job. But essentially, you know, she's essentially how should I say, not in good favor with Google. And there are other, Mr. Epstein, who's also been tracking their behavior and their influence on our elections in the United States. You know, there's just a lot of counter attack going on in terms of researchers that are pointing out the dangers of having too much information in the hands of powerful corporations. All right, another key issue in the lower right-hand corner is data quality. When a computer or an IoT device takes a picture, samples the motion in a room, etc., how do you know that that computer has not been compromised? So we look for processors that have attestation capabilities. So when we do capture some information, like a photograph, there's an attestation to say, yes, the processor was in a good state of compute. And this is typically a function or subset of functions of confidential computing. So we look for a processor that will be able to provide an ability to have provability or proof of provenance of the information. This is a one-page slide that was asked of me in presenting to the Air Force about 2 years ago, and they just wanted one slide. You know, tell us what you got here, Kevin. So be like an executive overview, and I don't want to read every word on the slide here, but this is simply explaining that yes, we have been designed to give operators the ability to build communities, conduct human intelligence operations, and control the identities of the informers, because it's highly, highly important that we protect the identities of an informant, because as soon as they're found out, they're dead, plus their family members. We also want to be able to give the soldier the ability to not leave a digital trail. So when I send a message to an asset, I don't want that message left on the phone. I want it gone, maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. And already operators said, Kevin, that's a very valuable to us in terms of operations and operators, is to be able to control where is our information, namely identities of ourselves, people in our group, etc. All right, this is the Trust Community Operator Kit. About 10 more minutes here. In the middle there is a Raspberry Pi. This is a part of the early prototype. We're sending messages. If you deploy your personal information, the command messages are going through a message server to those devices, such as a lock operation. But again, this is part of the dynamic capability to have an ability to control data wherever it exists, and for me to be in continuous control of that information asset. And I did speak this point here. In the middle of the page, it says security rule number 1, trust no one. I'm simply, that is the fundamental basis of security, is trust no one. And I'm arguing we should always maintain direct operational control over your information wherever it exists. All right, again, this is another analogy like automobiles having no safety belts. Humvees were not designed to be mine resistant. All right, this was a scandal within the Pentagon several years ago. We had too many soldiers being wounded or killed by IDEs, and we needed more vehicles that were designed to be able to suffer those attacks and not harm the occupants of the vehicle. I'm arguing that we need a new form of identity management. Identity management was data mining resistant. And I hope you're with me here. I want human beings to have more control over the information in these databases. We all know about OPM breach. There's 22.1 SF86 files stolen. That was pure negligence on behalf of our federal government. There were government auditors who warned them that they needed better multi-factor protection capabilities, and they were ignored. A little bit about artificial intelligence and machine intelligence. Perhaps you've read articles, and we'll go through some of the quotes here. But there are different AI algorithms, there are different methodologies, there's different approaches. All right. ID3 has been around for many, many years. Dr. Shapiro's on the call here, is one of those inventors who modified it, and he built a platform to help engineers like myself build complex systems. And so we take rule sets, they get fed into this platform, and they produce code, whatever language we want. But we're using this platform to capture the rule sets For instance, the rule might be this photograph is only good for my family members, or this object is only good for people within my group. But we need to write code that would execute within a trusted execution environment. And we're using AI to produce human understandable documentation. And it will also verify the rule's logic. Namely, are there any conflicts? Is there any illogic? Did I create a rule that doesn't make sense? Are there gaps or areas that were not covered here? And so that's a very powerful use of AI to enhance the maintenance of the rule sets. But the other key thing here is that if you've ever read articles or looked at neural networks and the growing complexity of it, the authors will simply say again and again and again, they're no longer human understandable. We don't actually know how they're working. Personally, I want to have a system that is verifiable, that is testable, that is going to obey and execute the rules that I've specified for the data. I'm looking at my watch here, 15 more minutes. I want to leave at least 10 minutes for questions here. This slide was essentially drones that may be doing surveillance of an environment looking for a shooter. We need to find out where that shooter is, but we need to protect and control that target data. And I'm arguing that the operator ought to be able to control and communicate with that drone, but the information that's sent back to him or the information he sends to the drone, that should be under the controls, the strict control. I don't want other systems to be able to capture or to modify that target data. And this was one of the original responses by US SOCOM and one of the operators in the support group within Special Forces. You know, I've been invited 3 times to present down at SOCOM, USA SOC. These are technical experimentations and also the Innovation Foundry events. I keep on sending white papers. I keep talking about confidential computing. I've been doing this since 2017. I waited 2.5 years, and yes, the futures manager said, Kevin, we apologize. It took so long, but you know, we gave you a report here, and I got multiple reports, and they're also saying, hey, these are critical capabilities. All right, but I'm just being very candid here, and I'm still frustrated by the fact our company has not been awarded any funding yet, and yet we keep having these very positive responses from the community of operators. And again, the operators look at these are prototype screenshots. You want to be able to control identity. You want to be able to unlock at will. You want to be able to erase at will, and you want to be able to audit at will. You want to be able to do trust management. In real time, I want to be able to say, hey, somebody has behaved badly with regarding the use of this last secret. All right, we feel that they've been talking to the wrong people, etc. We need to now reclassify them as not trusted. All right, and send that quickly out. So this informant right now, we've lost confidence in their ability to remain loyal to the mission here. I want to be able to do that in real time. Some of our worst violators of security have people with the highest levels of clearances in the United States. That's just a fact. All right, and I'm simply saying we need to augment the security classification process with real-time reporting on the person's use of the information. Architectural principles, human digital dignity. I'm simply saying we ought to acknowledge and respect human digital dignity. So when I build systems, this is the architectural principle. The other principle is human digital integrity. I want to make sure that I never separate a person's data from their rules. Right now, they're all separated. We have no control. All right, and I'm simply saying as an architect, I want to architect systems that respect human digital integrity. Never separate a person's data from their rules, their governing security and privacy policies. All right, just briefly about Samsung Knox. That is a security container that we're using on a Samsung device. And, you know, I've been a part of the Knox program since its inception. I was trained, I was probably in the very first, I was in the first training course for resellers for Samsung Knox. And of course, the FBI, many agencies and military are using the Knox environment. Knox is built on a trusted computing platform. It leverages the capabilities of TrustZone in order to support its functionality. But there's secure boot here. There's the ability for ARM TrustZone to detect whether or not somebody is attempting to modify the kernel of the system. But again, you have this strict separation between the regular OS and the Samsung container, what's inside of it. And this is broadly available, licensable to many people. Actually, Samsung Knox is embedded in every Samsung phone out there. Confidential computing. There's a normal world, secure world. You get an SDK, software development kit, you as a programmer, you write a trusted application to run inside the secure world. Little caveat here, Samsung is very open, Qualcomm is very open to developers, etc. There are companies like Trustonic, which will provide you a license. I can't tell you how much it costs because we're under NDA with them, but it's not cheap, all right? There are open source versions of this capability. I would argue that they're coming along in terms of availability on different platforms as the OPTEE group. And essentially they are growing essentially an open source version of TrustZone. But again, this is an enclave on a computer to have the ability to protect data and workloads in use. And one of the key areas that I'm trying to get more access to is how do you move workloads in a heterogeneous environment between one TrustZone implementation on an IoT device to a cloud server or to a mobile device, because all of these are different manufacturers. Today, Apple does not allow developers to write trusted applications to run on TrustZone inside of an Apple phone. I only met one company at a conference that got permission to do this. You know, maybe the government can assist Apple to open this up to developers. All right, this is a more of a commercial use here, but it's a merchant in a trusted advertising capability. Namely, I want to transform the electronic commerce so advertisers who respect privacy can license your information, but you're always in control of it. You never lose control of it, and you actually would get paid for the use of your information, rather than you never getting paid anything for the use of your information. All right, and again, the obvious benefits is that the users are in control of any monetization of their information in this environment. Let's just wrap up here with some AI matters here. You know, the godfather of AI, this is a recent presentation. Go look this up on YouTube, John Lennox. He's published a book recently. There are a lot of AI folks right now are sounding the alarms. Elon Musk is one of them. But again, he's very, very concerned about a super intelligence and what that means for humanity. As an engineer, Alan, he's been in this for 30, 40 years, all right? I'm simply saying that there are enough people here who are sounding the warning alarms. We need to have some sort of controls over how this is progressing in terms of a super intelligence. Obviously, there would be benefits to having a super intelligence, maybe to create inventions that would do wondrous, miraculous things in the world of health medicine, right? And there's also obvious applications for warfare. And yes, we've got plenty of drone jets and other things that are being developed right now in order to have an advantage in the field of warfare. But I'm going to close now and open up for questions.
Okay, Don Timmy here. You can post a question in the chat window, or you can just come up and ask Kevin uh, by turning on your microphone in Zoom, or if you want to turn on your camera too. So any questions?
So this is Tom Tenorio. Great presentation.
Thank
I
you, Tom.
attended a workshop at Santa Fe Institute that was held by the Europeans on cybersecurity, and they asked everybody in the room who was an American to raise their hand. And they actually had to take us outside so we wouldn't be disruptive. And they would ask us, first of all, you found out you were the persona that was generating $1 billion for a company. Do you feel like you deserve some portion of the money? And universally, everybody answered yes. And then they said, well, that's what the Europeans are advocating for. So let's not get into this free market stuff in this workshop, because it's an important problem. And but in general, the awareness I think that you're explaining is that stateside, we're just not clear on why we need protection and why this is leaving us with huge holes. And really, the notion of a cyber state, it essentially exists, but it's controlled by the corporations right now. Over.
All right. I agree with all your statements in the fact that we do exist now in a heavily big tech corporate surveilled world. And there are forces in Europe that are certainly fighting against and have been in the courts for years. Right? They've sued Google. There have been cases in Ireland, etc., over the right to be forgotten. Right. And so I'm simply saying the war goes on, and right now I believe we are the losers in the United States. And that's largely because the corporations are way too powerful. Yes, there are a few senators who are trying to file get the antitrust moving here, but they have way too much information. They have way too much power.
So
go ahead. I don't hear Tom any longer, Don. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just fine, Kevin, and I don't know what happened with Tom. Doug Samuels has a comment. He shares all your concerns, but be careful what you wish for. In healthcare, the privacy advocates won all the arguments, and as a result, many kinds of data sharing and pattern analysis are prohibited under HIPAA.
Well, what I'm arguing is for controlled sharing, and give the patient, my God, give the patient some sort of choice that is simply not a piece of paper in an agency. I want them to have direct control. I love my doctors. All right, I want them to be able to share information. I was in the ER this weekend passing some kidney stones. Oh my God, I love the fact that my doctor, 48 hours, had full access to the CAT scan. All right, he did. He didn't have a problem. But again, I just wanted to know the second time I went into the ER, what was that pain medication? And the nurse kind of danced. I had to go to some other office and request whatever. I'd rather have an app that said, "Hey, here's my patient medical record," and I know exactly what was given to me. So I'm simply saying it goes both ways. I want the ability to control, but I want that ability, my rules to travel with the data object. And if I allow my doctors to see it, that's great. But it's giving me more granular control. Does that help, Don?
You got to be smarter than Zoom, and I am not.
Okay.
Doug's having a problem with being able to turn on his microphone. So He may jump up in the chat window here in a moment. Jesse Canchoya, if I pronounced it correctly, apologies, but I have to step away for another meeting, top of the hour. What steps can individuals, communities, and organizations take to support the movement towards human digital liberty and adopt technologies like SDDP?
That's an excellent question. I've been trying for many years, and I see three things that need to be happening at the same time. Number one, we're a small innovator. We need funding. All right. We need SBIR, but we haven't been able to obtain any SBIR. We tried multiple times, but small businesses need more funding to advance these technologies. Secondly, we need people within who are the decision makers of prioritizing cybersecurity and privacy to continue to make this a priority for our federal government and our agencies. And I do know and recognize that there are agencies that are hostile to citizens having this level of control. I'm not going to duck that or not talk about it. It's very real. I've been a part of the debates, the Total Information Awareness Program by the NSA, et cetera. And we had judges and others going and talking live with the admiral running the program. And so there are deep set philosophical disagreements as to what extent that I'm simply saying it's good at least that we're talking. And I want to have open dialogue about the policies over control of information. And thirdly, education. We need to educate more and more people that there are promising technologies in the world that are designed to provide them that control. The legal term is informational self-determination. And I would like laws that specifically said human beings have a right of informational self-determination. They had a right to control. Many laws are written that you have access, you have a right to change or update the data or have yourself erased, but not control. I mean, that word is specifically left out. So legislation, education, funding.
Okay, anyone else with a question? I've got a follow-up comment from Doug Samuelson, but I'll hold it here for a minute or two. Should anyone else have a question?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, got you good, Tom. Go ahead, please.
To what extent have you thought about cellular integrity as a driving requirement to this work you're doing? Because the idea that a superorganism would, at the cellular level, allow for full membrane interactions with everything simply doesn't scale. Have you ever brought this into the biological perspective? Over.
Oh boy, Tom. Are you talking about a human-machine interface to the brain?
No, I'm talking about data as a cellular building block, and the idea would be you would protect that cell. The permeable membrane would have rules. It would just not be open, because that's what we're creating right now. As we look at the data-driven society, if the core component has no integrity, then how can you build on it?
Well, again, so you're using the cell as an analogy, as a metaphor, correct? The biological cell having
That is correct. That is correct.
Right. When I think of my invention, as any inventor does, we struggle with how do we communicate to an audience that are not software engineers to say, how does this thing work? What are its advantages? And so I chose to use an automobile and safety belts for one of my metaphors, all right, arguing that our bodies, if they're data and they're in a vehicle, which is a program traveling along the information highway, they have no safety belts. Now you're arguing that we could create a sort of shell around the data, and the data being sort of the core GUI stuff, and there's some sort of wall. And I'm saying that, yes, we do have a wall. It's called trust zone. It's a trusted computing environment. It is hardware. You cannot violate the membrane of a trusted computing platform. There is a broker within the technology, and there's also an API that allows a normal world application to talk to a trust zone application. So that is essentially your membrane, but it is a controlled, rule-controlled interaction. So I think you're right in simply saying that there is a wall in my architecture. It's trust zone, it's hardware and software, but I am using isolated memory. And there's a very strict, controlled way to get in and out of a trust zone environment. And that's the wall, that's the membrane. Does that help, Tom?
Yeah, the core issue I'd like to get to is that more specialized behavior can only come out of more thought. And I think trust and protection are just two aspects of what do you need to actually have full-blown dialogue with the outside world. And I think your framework actually would provide a building block for that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm very much of an advocate of free speech, and especially in a tyrannical state such as the CCP. One of the key aspects of fighting irregular warfare is finding allies, such as World War II in the French resistance. You know, how did we communicate with them and do it secretly through radios and whatever means? And likewise, in our future today, are there going to be platforms that we can create to voice and to communicate with people who want liberty in controlled states such as North Korea and China? And so I'm simply arguing our platform is an ability to create data objects that would not be detectable and or interceptable by a hostile anti-liberty state. And that's one of the objectives here, is to recreate the message so it is self-protecting, and it's only available to other individuals that are aligned with what our mission is, which may be liberty in a foreign state. Thank you, Tom, for the question.
Okay, it's roughly 6 after the hour, according to my clock. So let's give it a minute or so here, and we'll see if anyone else has a question. Either you can come up and chat, or you can simply unmute your microphone. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you for taking the time, Kevin, to present today, and thank you, Dr. Shapiro, for sitting in with us. Oh, Doug Samuelson's interested if you have any comment to your. He agrees with what you had said earlier to his comment, but not entirely. There was a big legal case several years ago that held that a patient who somehow had immunity against HIV owned his own blood chemistry and could therefore set monopoly prices for anyone to use his blood in research or treatment. Any thoughts or comments there, Kevin?
All right. The German Supreme Court back in 1983 issued an opinion on data, human data. They argued that human beings have a right of informational self-determination, but it can be overridden. It can be overridden by a social public interest.
Okay.
That's a bunch of judges. Okay. And I would argue that yes, if you're a terrorist, you have no privacy. Okay. And if you had some rare blood that could be of use, the German court was arguing if there's a societal necessity to get access to the data. They didn't give any specifics, all right? They just said a general principle. It can be overridden by a public interest.
Hmm.
And that was a bunch of
Doug likes the German position better than the American. Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. Sorry, I am fighting a bit of a cold right now.
All right. Well, Don, thank you for inviting us, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this subject.
No, it's always a pleasure, Kevin, and I appreciate all your help pulling together the various pieces of info I needed to provide to the MORS staff. Again, thanks to everyone, and have a good rest of your week. Bye.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.